Good morning. My name is Ann Fullerton, and I will be your worship advisor today. We are fortunate to have David Griffith with us as our sermon, and I have to say what a gracious person he is. He stepped in when Leonard Lash, who was going to be our sermonizer today, fell. Unfortunately, broke 3 ribs and is not in any good shape to be here. And David graciously has accepted this honor and will do our service. So I thank him so much. So welcome. We are a welcoming congregation. Please feel, if you are a new visitor, that we would like to get to know you better. We would like to have time to chat with you. Stay after service and enjoy our refreshments, and we would welcome you with open arms. We wish Leonard well, and there will be a card out in the foyer for you to sign and wish him a happy, speedy recovery. We light our chalice as a symbol of our friendship and community, just as those persecuted during World War II found our chalice as a symbol of safe refuge. Let us light the chalice together. And Stephen Robbie will light the chalice for us, and we will repeat the words that are in the order of service. Each morning, we must hold out the chalice of our being to receive, to carry, and to give back. Wow. That was beautiful. Thank you very much. The ironic part of that beautiful opening is that when Leonard and I got together to talk about his sermon, that is the song he chose, and he called Stephen and asked him if he would do it. And when I was informed that Leonard was not able to be here, I talked to David Griffith, and I said, do you have a sermon up your sleeve, something you could pull out and do? And he said, well, let me think about it, Ann. So the next day when I spoke to him, he said, I think I'd like to do something about being raised in the South and what it was like to be raised in that atmosphere. And I got chills because this song had already been chosen, and it's such a beautiful knitting of ideas. So we're very fortunate. Joys and sorrows. It's a time. All right. tonight, seeing there are no more joys and sorrows, we're going to stay seated and we're going to sing Spirit of Life, which is number 123 in your hymnal.
We're changing the order of service a little bit, and the reading lower down in your order of service, Equality by Maya Angelou, will be done now, and it'll give us something to meditate upon. Equality. You declare you see me dimly through a glass which will not shine. Though I stand before you boldly, trim and rank and marking time, you do own to hear me faintly as a whisper out of range, while my drums beat out the message and the rhythms never change. Equality, and I will be free. Equality, and I will be free. You announce my ways are wanton, that I fly from man to man. But if I'm just a shadow to you, could you ever understand? We have lived a painful history. We know the shameful past. But I keep on marching forward, and you keep on coming last. Equality, and I will be free. Equality, and I will be free. Take the blinders from your vision, take the padding from your ears, and confess you've heard me crying and admit you've seen my tears. Hear the tempo so compelling. Hear the blood throb in my veins. Yes, my drums are beating nightly, and the rhythms never change. Equality, and I will be free. Equality, and I will be free.
Our responsive reading is on page 598. And it is a responsive reading that is from the Buddhist philosophy. Every creature abound in well-being and peace.
May every living being, big or small, the long and small, the short and the medium size, the mean and the great.
May every living being, seen or unseen, those dwelling far off, those living nearby, those already born, and those waiting to be born. Let no one deceive another. Let no one despise another in any situation.
Let no one arrange which evil to anyone at all.
Just as a mother with her own life protects her only child from hurt, so within yourself foster a limitless concern for every living creature. Love unrestrained, without hate or enmity. We will now receive our offering for this morning. Where are my plates? There they are. Oops.
The title of my sermon is Growing Up with Racism. Can you hear me fine in the back? Oh. Growing up with racism, it's a very personal story. It's a little bit unusual for those who have heard previous sermons that I've done. It's a little different. But anyway, what is racism? How does one experience its pernicious influence and find a way to combat it? For me, its insidious nature was the cultural norm, a constant and pervasive influence that was with me every day, every minute, growing up in Tennessee in the 40s and 50s. I don't need to tell you about the civil rights movement that eventually forced Southern culture to drop the laws of segregation and the anger and bitterness in the South, which took years to slowly subside. Today, I want to share with you how I experienced this social injustice as a white Southerner. The simple answer, it was what everyone I knew growing up just accepted as how it was supposed to be. Its justification was unquestioned. It was unnecessary to justify it. But the larger issue is, how does one reconcile the pious Christian statements of the white majority with the actual enforcement of a segregated system which denies those pieties? What happens when you begin to be aware of this conflict? What makes you sort through this resulting confusion to arrive at a view that seems consistent and morally defensible? Though I can recount many stories of how I came to change my mind and shift my focus to the injustices and humiliation that racial segregation inflicted on blacks, I will limit myself to two. Each of these is from a sequence of 26 letters I have composed over the years to my California granddaughter, Chloe. They were titled Letters to Chloe. Each one is a description of a short period in my life that I believe gave her greater understanding of me, my growing up as a white Southern kid, and a history of a part of our country she knows nothing about. Now remember, this letter, which I'm going to excerpt from, is written to a child and supposed to be read when she was maybe 8 or 9 years old. Dear Chloe, though I grew up in Tennessee and a large percentage of the population was black, I didn't really get to know a black person until I was in high school and working at the local drugstore. I'm not kidding. They were all around but invisible. Though white people always nodded to each other and said hey or hello when they passed, we didn't acknowledge blacks at all. They worked behind the scenes as janitors, car washers, and cleaning women in private homes. They were rather invisible since they were never neighbors or co-workers or anyone we might have personal contact with. As kids, we certainly didn't go to the school with them or play together. Chloe, this didn't seem odd to me at the time at all. But this was to change when I met D4 Bailey. D4 was a student at Tennessee A&I, an all-black university, near where he and I both worked part-time jobs at Walgreens. One day I was working as a cashier when I saw a black man, about 50 years old, come in wearing overalls and a plaid work shirt, old boots, and an engineer's cap. He walked hesitatingly over to the lunch counter and stood waiting for one of the waitresses to take his order. He didn't sit down because the unwritten law of the South was that blacks didn't eat with white people. So he just stood, removed his cap, and waited patiently. Now, after about 5 minutes, one of the waitresses noticed him standing there and said in her heavy Southern accent, "Hey, D4, we got one of y'all's kind here. I'll send him over." You see, Chloe, because D4 was also black, he could serve other blacks, but the white waitresses would have found it degrading to wait on blacks. I mean, these waitresses were not educated or upper class, but they were still, in their minds, socially superior to any black. So the waitress looked back and yelled at the poor black man, Y'all get on over to D4. He'll fix y'all something to take out. Of course, D4 was hired as a dishwasher and not a cook. But the other cooks weren't about to prepare a meal for a black man any more than the waitresses would serve it. So D4 dried his hands and walked over to the man and said, "What would you like?" The black man responded, "Oh, just a hamburger with a little mayonnaise, tomato, and lettuce. And if you please, maybe could I have a cup of water?" "Just a minute," said D4 softly, and he turned, walked to the refrigerator, took a hamburger patty out, and slapped it on the grill. A little while later, a cook yelled at D4, "That hamburger needs flipping." And he returned to cook some other orders. He was not about to flip the hamburger himself. D4 went to the grill and flipped the hamburger onto the other side and returned to washing dishes. When he guessed the hamburger was done, he put it on a bun, then in a paper bag, and poured a paper cup of water for the black man. He then went over and gave it to him along with a check. D4 looked over at me and hesitated. I suddenly realized he was looking to see if I would take the money from a black man and hand him change. I reached over the counter and said to the man, "You can pay me over here." He looked kind of surprised and hesitantly came over, handed me a $5 bill, and I gave him change, though making sure I never actually touched his hand, something I had been taught as a child. He walked out and sat on the curb to eat his meal. The whole transaction had taken about 20 minutes from start to finish. He probably had never been served by a white person in his entire life and probably didn't think the whole thing was unusual, nor did anyone in the place except D4. I noticed that D4 was particularly silent for the rest of the day. After our shifts were over, I went downstairs to change my clothes. We had a locker in those days. I saw D4 coming out of a janitor's closet and said, "D4, what are you doing in there?" He laughed and said, "You really don't understand things, do you, Dave? This is where I have to dress. They don't let me share your locker room, and I haven't got a locker like y'all do." After a pause, he continued, "Have you ever noticed that I don't use the bathroom that you do? I use that little room over there." He pointed to another door, which I thought just had storage in it. It looked unused and dirty. Then he said, "And if a Negro customer comes in and needs the washroom, he has to use that room too. In fact, I have to clean it up. The white women, who usually clean up the entire store, won't go in there. They won't put in more toilet paper, paper towels, etc. So if I'm going on vacation, they just let things run out and the room gets filthy. And another thing, there isn't a lock on the bathroom door, and both sexes use the same room, so if you're doing your business, anyone can walk in on you. They really don't believe Negroes care if they walk in on each other when they're going to the bathroom." There was plenty of concern that if a black had tries to use the white ladies' room, as we were all told, that they had infectious diseases. I was really taken aback. I hadn't noticed any of these things. And I had been there. Now a bunch of things became more clear. There were rules about blacks and whites which were unspoken and unwritten that I knew I had to abide by. I had never thought about them and about why black people were inferior, and we the whites had to remain apart from them. The system would only let blacks do things which kept them physically separated from us. Serving food and touching hands would spread their contamination to us. So they could not share our water fountains, bathrooms, schools, restaurants, and neighborhoods. We were taught to think of them as children, ones that would never grow up. This didn't mean we were vicious to them. Why, we gave them our old clothes. This was known as totem privileges. We let them come in late on Monday morning after getting drunk and drive them to the bus stop after work. In fact, some of us, but not my family, were rich enough to have them as maids and chauffeurs. They helped raise white kids and carried golf bags at the country club. We certainly didn't feel ill will toward any of them, and we treated them as we would our children, lovingly and parentally, but requiring discipline from time to time. D4 realized that I was really interested in all that he showed me. I began to see the world of blacks quite differently than before. I was more and more appalled. When I discussed this with other kids at school, they looked at me incredulously. Obviously, some thought I had been influenced by my big brother Chuck, who had gone north to college. Clearly, some subversive, of course, Yankees, were influencing me. After a while, I just quit talking about it. But I continued to listen to D4 describe the system as he experienced it. I realized that he kept calm on the outside, but inside he was very angry. I was beginning to share his anger. One spring day when I got to work, I found out that D4 had been arrested and taken to the police station. Supposedly, he and a friend had been planning to rob the store and caught in the act the previous night. The rumor was that the evidence was, of course, overwhelming. The employees at the store were all very smug about it. That D4 was really uppity. I knew he was a good-for-nothing Negro, or he'll get whatever he deserves, always complaining about things around here. I'm not surprised that he was planning to rob us. They're all no good, no how, and so on and so on. But I never was sure exactly what happened. D4 was too smart to plan a robbery and simply get caught in the act, plus his college education was almost over, and he would have certainly been able to get a better-paying job within a few months. Perhaps he had really angered one of the white managers or pharmacists. Whatever went on, I'll probably never know the truth. Sorry, I've got my pages messed up here a little bit. You left out page 5. You didn't know? Thank you. My wife was copying it, and unfortunately, one page got missed. This story marks one of the turning points in my inward transition to a social critic. And it would lead me to acknowledge that I had to leave the South and go to college in the North, as my brother did. I was admitted to the University of Chicago, and this was really my first real contact with blacks on an equal social level. Yes, the blacks had considerably greater opportunities and respect than in the South, but it was far from perfect. I was really thrown by my first experience of arriving in a black community when I was 18. My next letter to Chloe is about that experience and my reaction to it. Dear Chloe, finally I was ready and the day arrived to go to college. My mother gave me $50 to help me get there and cover my first month's expenses. Then she drove me into Nashville and bought me a one-way ticket to Chicago. But Chloe, here's where it gets interesting. I went into the station and saw the two waiting rooms, white waiting room, colored waiting room, knowing the rules of the South and not wanting to suffer the consequences of breaking them. I went to the appropriate one and took my seat. I was very thirsty, so I went over to the water fountain that said whites only and drank without letting this bother me. The truth is that I'd come to question racial segregation since my connection to D4, but this was not the time for me to openly question it. The train rolled through the night, the rocking of the car putting everyone else to sleep. Lexington, Louisville, it's Louisville, not Louisville. Indianapolis, Lafayette, and finally the 63rd Street station in South Chicago. This, Chloe, was the main stop for migrating blacks from the South who were going north to look for jobs and a better life. A number of them got off from a separate car for coloreds, and I, too, got off and dragged my suitcase across the street in the chill air and overcast sky. The people at the station and surrounding area were almost all blacks, and I felt for the first time in my life out of place because I was white, even a little afraid though no one bothered me at all. I asked directions to the university from a friendly railroad employee, and when he heard my southern accent, he looked at my overcoat and suitcase, then laughed softly and said, "Going to the university, huh? Well, just cross over there and take the northbound Stony Island bus number 23. He laughed again. And I had never been in a colored neighborhood before and had to admit to being wary. But his genuine friendliness had helped put me at ease. I boarded a bus heading for the university that was about 10 blocks away. The bus driver, a middle-aged black, was busy maneuvering through traffic and taking payments from passengers, but I stood next to him at the front of the bus and chatted away. Finally, he turned to me and said in a rather exasperated voice, quote, "Please take a seat. You're blocking the passengers." I looked at him in complete surprise and started to stammer the obvious. But there are no seats in front, until I realized that this was a new city with new ideas about race. I didn't have to sit in front of the coloreds. They didn't have to move to the back of the bus. Here in Chicago, there were no separate waiting rooms for coloreds and whites and no separate water fountains. I could just ignore these signs of others' humiliations and experience life in Chicago without these barriers between races. Maybe I could actually get to know someone who was colored. With these thoughts in mind, I smiled and said in my slight southern drawl, "Thanks," and began my trip to the back of the bus. I knew something had changed in my life, and I was never going to be exactly the same. Anger and bitterness on the part of the oppressed are still with us, and so many fellow Americans still harbor feelings of disdain and superiority toward them. Is it any wonder so many of us could never see the dysfunctionalism, humiliation, and cultural breakdown that are still part of the black inheritance created by white culture? Well, I could go on and on about the impact of racism on my growing up, but there are better and more sophisticated accounts than letters to my grandchild. I have often pondered the difficulty that we all have when forced to confront our most fundamental values of the world we grew up in and face the fact that they are morally wrong. Can we completely overcome our past? I hope these letters to Chloe give you some insight into the transformation of one Southerner on his path to reconciling morality and social justice. Perhaps it is never ending, but I'm glad to be on the same path as all of you, my fellow UUs. Amen. Thank you. Thank you.
Take courage, friends. The way is often hard. The path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage, for deep down there is another truth, and you are not alone. Please turn to page 108 in your hymnal, and our final hymn, My Life Flows On in Endless Song. Please rise if you are able. My life flows on in endless song. There's no limitation. I hear the real, though far off tune that hails a new creation. Through all the tumult and the strife, I hear the music ringing. It sounds an echo in my soul. How can I keep from singing? The tempest round me roars. Know the truth, it liveth. What though the darkness round me close? Are leading, since love prevails in heaven and earth. How can I keep from singing when tyrants tremble as they hear the bells of freedom ringing? Every voice, both far and near, how can I keep from singing? How can I keep from singing? Hold on to what is good, even if it is a handful of earth. Hold on to what you believe, even if it is a tree standing by itself. Hold on to what you must do, even if it is a long way from here. Hold my hand, even when I have gone far away from you. Go in peace.
Thank you for talking to my granddaughter.
I was going to go, but I got Thank you.
I wish you'd sing. Anytime I do a sermon, I want you to sing.
Just all you have to do is ask.
We'll fit them together.
Yeah, you just